Okay, so most of the questions that we are interested about are shocks to the equilibrium which lead the economy to a new equilibrium. In the exam, I will test you on your ability to understand how various changes move the curves and lead the economy into a new equilibrium. Let's talk about the long run. If the economy is in Y full, it means that the unemployment rate is actually equal to the natural rate of unemployment. If Y is bigger than Y full, in the short run, it means that the inflation rate is going to be higher in the next period. Therefore, the central bank will increase the interest rate. Thus, interest in the long run would be bigger than the interest in the short run. If Y is smaller than Y full in the short run, it means that the inflation rate is going to be lower in the next period. Therefore, the central bank will lower the interest rate. Thus, the interest rate in the long run would be smaller at the end from the interest rate in the short run. Now let's talk about how we move to the long run equilibrium. So suppose that Y is smaller than Y full, therefore the expected inflation must decline. At this point, I don't show the fourth graph yet. I'll do it later, but just explaining what's going on. If the inflation rate declines, the central bank would shift the MP curve to the right and reduce the interest rate in order to achieve the higher output. So the process will end in the long run when Y equals to Y full. If Y is bigger than Y full, then the inflation rate, hence expected inflation rate, will be higher. This will lead to the central bank to shift the MP curve to the left and to increase the interest rate in order to achieve lower output. The process will end in the long run where Y will be Y equal to Y full. I didn't say earlier, also in this graph and in the previous one, you can see that once we have new equilibrium and different interest rate, it of course affects the capital flow, the net capital flow, and the imports minus exports. So at the end of the day, Y full will be achieved, and no assurance that the inflation target will be achieved, by the way. Okay, so I wanted to continue talk about the fourth diagram model, and here I have, wait, where's the slideshow? Thank you. So here I have the four graphs, and we see here, for instance, we always first, when we solve these problems, we have to make sure that we know where is Y in relation to Y full. So here, for instance, Y is bigger than Y full, and that's actually an indication that in the long run inflation will increase. So we can see here that if in the short run we are in an equilibrium of Y bigger than Y full, what will happen? In the long run, inflation will start to rise. That's an increase in the IA curve. It will rise until the IA curve will meet the AD curve exactly at Y full, and the central bank will increase the interest rate exactly to the point where MP equal IS at Y full. The increased R will lead to increase in capital flow, net capital flow, and that's actually a new source of dollars to our economy, so the net imports will also increase, import minus export will increase, and the real exchange rate will decrease. Here is the other option, Y smaller than Y full, and this is, by the way, our examples of what happens from the short run and to the long run, where there is no intervention in the short run, nothing changed in the short run, but in the long run inflation responds to the situation, and that's why the monetary policy has to respond. So Y is smaller than Y full in the short run. That would lead to a decrease in inflation rate in the long run. The IA curve and the AD curve will meet at Y full. The central bank will decrease the interest rate to reach an intersection of MP and IS exactly at R that leads to Y full. the decrease in interest rate will reduce the capital flow, the net capital flow, and will increase and as a result of that we have less foreign currency, so the import minus export must be reduced. Since we have much less foreign currency, we have higher real exchange rate. Here actually I urge you to go back and just make sure that you understand when the AD curve shifts. So for instance, here we had a situation where in the short run G increased, that led to a higher IS, which immediately shifts the AD to the right, and then the inflation rate changes according to the relation between Y and Y full. So here for instance in the short run we actually started from Y full, G increased, so IS increased, so now we reach Y higher than Y full, and the AD curve shifted to the right because in the short run there was prevalent inflation rate with higher output. But because now we are at a situation where Y is bigger than Y full, the interest rate must increase even more, so to reach back Y full. So MP curve shifts to the left, meet the new IS curve in the point of Y full, and the two new IA and AD meet exactly at a higher inflation rate with output of Y full. Here actually I don't think I should review that, we did that in class, but in general this is actually the same thing I said earlier, just showing that because interest rate increased, CF will increase, import minus export will increase, and real exchange rate will decrease. So here you have a summary of the results, but I think at this point you already understand it. So just make sure that you know what happens whenever in the short run G changes, C changes, I changes. Every component of the aggregate demand or components of the Taylor rule can shift the curve and actually create these shocks. Okay, the last two things I want to review is our inflation shock. Inflation shock is something that immediately in the short run inflation changes. That's something that has to be stated as inflation shock, that it happens in the short run rather than in the long run. Basically a negative inflation shock lift IA, and it says negative because higher inflation is bad. So when inflation shock increases the inflation rate at the short run, it's a negative inflation shock because it's actually a negative effect on the economy. The positive inflation shock lowers IA, actually means that inflation is lower, which is a good thing for the economy, and that's why it's called positive inflation shock. Immediately when we have inflation shock, so producers have to change the prices immediately for all kind of reasons. So here we had examples of the oil price shock, other taxes that come in, opening the market for foreign competition requires immediate response on the producer side. So whenever we have change in inflation, that would actually change the monetary policy. So the central bank must respond. So for instance, here in a situation where we have a negative inflation shock in the short run, that actually leads to an increase in the interest rate, decrease in output, and that means that in the short run we're going to suffer unemployment. Here we started originally from Y full, and then in the long run, actually after this shock, inflation must go down. So the good news actually that in the long run the inflation shock actually cancels out here, but it takes a long time and people are suffering unemployment during the process. The higher interest rate of course leads to a higher net capital flow, higher import minus export, and a reduction in the real exchange rate because we have more dollars coming in. Supply shock is a change in Y full, or a change in natural rate of unemployment. It can happen because we have immigration, so changes in the labor force that were not expected and happens immediately. We have productivity shock, so that's actually new technology that actually changes the rule of the game and allow us to produce more, so that's a supply shock. And normally what happens is that here, by the way, there is actually two options you can take, which I accept both. So here for instance, if we start from Y full and we have a supply shock, it means that actually we are in a situation of unemployment. So in the short run, only Y-fold changes, but in the long run, the central bank responds in the long run, because we are in a new situation of unemployment, inflation rate goes down, and as a result of that, the central bank responds by reducing the interest rate and shifting MP to the right. So that's actually a lower interest rate and lower import minus export and higher real exchange rate. So that's actually a situation where Y-full changes. That's the only thing that changes in the long run. Then there's a response of inflation and a response of monetary policy in the long run. Sorry, Y-full changes in the short run, and in the long run, change of inflation and monetary policy. Actually, you could also argue, for instance, that in the long run, the monetary policy can change because of this change in Y-full that affects the Taylor rule. I will accept both ideas because in Romer book it's a bit different, so I don't want to confuse you. So if you do it either that or either that, it's okay. So if you came so far in my review session, in my online review session, I think you totally deserve my my words to you that I hope you will succeed in the test and that things are clearer now. And good luck, and enjoy what you learned. Bye bye.